I will be happy to give the floor to Dr. Arnold Bosman, public health specialist, who will speak about training in public health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The honor is mine to stand between you and the coffee. And doing that, I'd like to also have the benefit into linking to many topics that the previous speakers have mentioned. To start with the job opportunities for the people, I think this is a really important topic to already show to the people who come to your training and to the people who come to your programs what type of job opportunities you have for them, and how they can prepare for that. The two training programs that I'd like to present to you, I'm happy to say they have a full set of graduates that are now employed. None of them is seeking a job, and over 90% of them are working in the area that we have trained them for. Over 90% of them are working in the European Union, either in the country that they have been trained in or back in their home country. What are these programs I'm talking about? These are postgraduate programs for professionals who are already working in public health, who are already working either in disease prevention and control or related areas, and who want to focus their career on specifically applying epidemiology in the field or applying public health microbiology to infectious disease control problems. Now, one of the things that 20 years ago we have noticed in the European Union is that there are really excellent epidemiology training programs, master programs in most of the European countries. And what we also noticed is that many of these graduates, once they come to a National Institute of Public Health or once they come to the challenge of applying that to the field, they notice that when you apply the epidemiology that you have been trained in, especially to disease prevention and control and outbreaks, it is very, very challenging. Real life world is very dirty, the data are dirty, they're hard to get, there's bias everywhere, there's confounding everywhere, and you really have to work under tremendous high pressure. At the same time, you need to engage a lot of stakeholders to get your data, and you need to present your data in such a way that action follows. And this is exactly where our training programs is focusing on, not to reinvent the wheel in terms of study design or explaining the p-value again, although I have to say that I have to remind people many times of good proper study design and p-value. So the program objectives, the reason that 20 years ago EPIET and also later in ECDC UFAM was set up, was to strengthen surveillance in EU member states at the EU level. And this was already in 1995, when the thought in Europe was we never need a center for disease prevention and control, we will work with networks of networks. To develop a public health response capacity that can respond to emergencies in the EU and beyond. And to develop a network of field epidemiologists that speak the same language, that know each other, that trust each other, and even across boundaries of jurisdiction can share design and share data if needed. To support outbreak detection and investigation and response nationally and internationality. And the microbiologists have added something to this to foster future leaders in public health microbiology, because the field of microbiology is evolving so tremendously strong. And the challenge is how to keep up pace with the new developments and how to apply it in a functional and in a smart way to public health. Now, when you enter the fellowship, and I'll tell you more about the numbers that enter, but when you enter the fellowship, you have your learning objectives, and these objectives are on the 5 the cornerstones that you have to show independence in during your 2 years of training. It's surveillance, being able to set up surveillance systems, to evaluate them, to be independent in investigating outbreaks, either as an epidemiologist or as a microbiologist, to work in the team, and to perform population-based studies. Since we're not training thousands of people, it is of essence that the people that finish this training, that they also serve as amplifiers of this new competence and knowledge. So teaching is something that we're teaching them to do. And communication is of utmost importance, both communication to the public and scientific communication. The methods are fully according to the principle of apprenticeships. It's learning through service. For 80% of their time, they're performing the service that they have to become experts in. And they do that under supervision of senior experts, 10% of their time they spent into dialogues with their supervisors to really improve the way how they work through the service. And then 10% of our time we spent in specialist courses when we come together in meetings like this, because I fully agree with the first speaker that there is such an importance in meeting together in terms not only of exchanging experience, but also getting a sense of belonging to the same network. Now, so we have two pathways, as I've already mentioned to you. We have an epidemiology pathway that started in 1995. And in 2007, we have actually agreed in Europe that these competences that we train the epidemiologists in these programs are European-wide accepted core competencies for intervention in epidemiology. In 2008, in ECDC, we noticed that the interaction between disciplines is also of key value in working in the disease prevention and control. And we started a pilot with asking microbiologists to really focus on their discipline in those areas of outbreaks and surveillance and population-based surveys. And the difference is that in the years before, we have had many microbiologists that went through our training program in EPIET. But when they finished, they said, I'm no longer a microbiologist, I'm now an epidemiologist, and I will work as an epidemiologist. So we saw the need of really guiding professionals who already have a PhD in microbiology, who are usually focused as a clinical microbiologist, to look at clinical diagnosis and clinical treatment, to take a population perspective and to see how your test performs in the field, how you have to apply creative diagnostics when you have an outbreak or when you have to work with many laboratories together, and how to work with the reference functions. So these are two distinct specialist profiles, but they work on the same 5 public health functions. And they are part of what I will come later in the presentation, what I call the communicable disease risk management cycle. Now the numbers are really very modest. In the past 20 years we have trained less than 500 people. But most of these 500 people we have now discovered they have ended up in key positions. One of them is currently acting director of ECDC, and actually the center of ECDC, we have 20% of our technical staff comes from these type of programs. So we noticed that the quantity is not the only thing that we have to focus on. We have to see who we select and how we guide these people to make a difference in European networks. Currently, and sorry, there's a typo in this slide, it's not 70, but there's 75 people in the current cohorts who are now in the 2 cohorts being trained. Last month, 39 have graduated. And before that, we had 324 successful graduates. If you add them up, you will see that not everyone of the 462 who entered the program has really successfully graduated, but that's, I think, part of every training program. Now, I've given one short example of what we do with the fellows. That is international deployments. Like one of the program objectives is to have a surge capacity, a response capacity to international crisis. In the past 20 years, 233 of these fellows, so that's every second fellow has been deployed in an international problem. Most of them outbreaks, some of them working on surveillance, and others doing surveys under difficult circumstances, like in refugee camps. Here you see how the numbers have grown. In the first years we had around 10 people per year. It was a very, very modest program, but in 2006 the program moved to the European Centre, and that was really a boost for our sustainability and for our scalability. So not only the epidemiology part grew, and what you see here, the orange one is the EPIA track, the blue one is country-specific training, where countries already have their own similar training program using exactly the same curriculum, but they join us as a network and they join us as a group. And in 2008 and later, the purple and the lila bars join, and these are the microbiologists. As you can see, there's not as many as epidemiologists, but that's also a matter of how many we need and where we place them. So improving surveillance works both in countries and at international level. And when ECDC was created, the biggest challenge in the first years is to merge all these national surveillance data into a European one. And that is where EPIET fellows have really made a big difference. but also response capacity in and beyond the EU. Most of them go through Médecins Sans Frontières or a request from the WHO network of Borne, the Global Outbreak Assistance and Response Network. But increasingly we see ECDC missions directing fellows to complex emergencies like Ebola or like to strengthen capacities of countries. For time's sake, I will skip this slide of international response and even just very briefly to show you when in 2009 the H1N1 epidemic was there, half of the cohort, 47 people, were deployed in crisis management with the H1N1 epidemic, either in their member state where they were placed, in different duties, or at the EU level. So what about food and waterborne diseases? In those 233 deployments in the past 20 years, only 21 of those international deployments had a relation to food and waterborne diseases. And so I think that gives a little bit the perspective of what other type of problems are being put on our desk. And most of them are about outbreaks. Cholera outbreaks, the most prevalent one, amoebiasis, cryptosporidium, etc. Some were about setting up surveillance. The Caribbean islands were asking, listen, we depend on our hotel industry. We really need to have a better surveillance system to detect foodborne outbreaks. Can these fellows help us? And with an international group of fellows, we improved the food and waterborne disease surveillance in the Caribbean. And on the right-hand side, you see the amount, the numbers of different pathogens, the agents that are now reported in this year in our annual scientific conference. Now, the whole fellowship has submitted 105 abstracts, and 21 of them are about food and waterborne diseases. So here we see already it's a bigger proportion of the total work that the fellows are submitting to the annual conference, and this reflects the type of work that they are being put to work on in the member states, where they are placed in the National Institute of Public Health or in the reference laboratory. Those abstracts in is guided to look a little bit more in depth. Again, outbreaks are the most of them. Classic outbreak investigation where you try to find the vehicle. But they're also trying to see how can new methods like online data collection during an outbreak and whole genome sequencing, how does that contribute to understanding the source and the mechanism of an outbreak better. And again, there are some surveillance topics, and then there are diverse study questions. But none of them, I've noticed, is linked to food risk assessment. So this is where I see a gap, and this is where I'm really happy to be here in this conference. I will give you two examples for time's sake of food and foodborne disease involvement of these fellows. And this is actually the most comprehensive one. In 2013, there were 3 major hepatitis A outbreaks concurrently in Europe linked to food. And actually all linked to berries, either frozen berries or fresh berries. The first one was detected in the Nordic countries, so the Scandinavian countries, and it was investigated by the group in Denmark, collecting all the data. There were 77 confirmed cases and 40 probable cases. And the fellows, the EPIAT fellows, were involved in all countries at the national level. And 3 documents came out of that, 2 Eurosurveillance article and a joint ECDC-EFSA rapid risk assessment. And for each of these assessments, fellows have made a major contribution or were the core author of the documents. Then there was, at the same year, a link to fresh strawberries, which were probably coming out of Egypt to the European Union. Again, this is something where the EPIAT fellows played a crucial role also in sharing information between countries. And here we see the value of the network, because the fellows do that because they are part of the same network, they are part of the same family. So you don't always have to go along the formal lines of the jurisdictions. You can very quickly get to the data that you need to do in a reliable and in a confidential way.
And the last one was actually the one where I was really happy to see this public health microbiology really come to added value, because this was a much larger, a multi-state European outbreak of hepatitis A, again linked to frozen berries, but now we had many more countries than only the Nordic countries. And here one of the public health microbiology fellows, the UFAM fellows, Rita de Souza, was in the Netherlands, played a key role in creating the single protocol that was used for the sequencing among the member state participating laboratories, something that did not take place in the previous ones. And the other example I'd like to show you is not the strawberry pickers that get leptospirosis in Germany, even though I'm very concerned about this, because this was already noted in 2007 by fellows to see that Romanian and Polish strawberry pickers in Germany get leptospirosis. We made an investigation and recommendations. They were not implemented, and last year we had exactly a similar outbreak, even now with many more people with leptospirosis. So the problem that we see is it's not just of having the evidence. We need to put the evidence where it really matters and where decision makers take a difficult decision, as we heard yesterday. But the last example that I want to show you before the coffee is about complex distribution chains. In 2005, there was an outbreak of salmonellosis detected of a rather rare Salmonella typhimurium. The international name is the DT104. And this was linked to a raw beef product eaten in the Netherlands. And it was a tenfold increase, still not so many cases, 169 countrywide. But a pre-processed raw beef product was a possible vehicle coming out of the case control survey. And the PFGE patterns and the MLVE patterns, they were identical to a previous Danish outbreak, which happened only a week before this one was discussed. And then we found out that the same batch of beef, which came from another European country, was involved. Now, I've copied one sentence out of the discussion of this article. Could the outbreak in the Netherlands have been averted by the recognition of the outbreak in Denmark? Against this notion is the complexity of the product tracing, which stretched this investigation into weeks, thus rendering a rapid intervention as a response to the RAS-FF alert impossible. And the Danish message was shared by the RAS-FF alert. So here you see this complexity from a cutting plant. Several tons of meat were imported to the Netherlands, and some of that was immediately exported back to other countries. Among them was Denmark. Of the 3,475 kilograms they got from the Netherlands, they gave us back a couple of weeks later 2,600 kilograms. That was sent to part of that was sent to a butcher, and that actually was attributed to be the vehicle of the outbreak. And when that was discovered, we sent the remaining meat back to the cutting plant, who already had admitted by that time in contact to say, yes, we already have identified a quality control problem. There could have been contamination here at the plant. Now, what astonished us is this really complex chain of food, because when Denmark gave us back the meat that had already been in the Netherlands, we decided that again we couldn't for some reason have a good marketing of that. So again, a ton of that meat went back to Denmark, and it went to other countries. Now, this is something which for epidemiologists is very difficult to understand, and we need to understand this better. We need to understand better how we can quickly share our evidence with those who can make decisions that can intervene and have a successful intervention in these complex chains of that. In terms of time, because I think we're close to the coffee, 3 minutes left, thank you. So this risk management cycle, how do we see that? From our perspective, from the human, the public health perspective, the key elements of this risk management cycle starts with event detection. And once an event is detected that may be a possible threat, then there needs to be a risk assessment to quantify and to qualify the risk, to see who is at risk and what are the mechanisms of this risk. And there can be a rapid risk assessment, there can be a formal risk assessment. And after that, you have control and preventive measures, which obviously are out of the mandate of our center, of the ECDC, but they're fully in the mandate of the member states where we place the fellows. So the fellows need to have a role there. And the fellows also need to understand how do these control and preventive measures take place in the European level. And this complex, let's say, chain of meat distribution is one of those examples of why it is really very difficult for public health staff to understand those type of control measures. And still we need to get a picture of that. And after that you need to have evaluation and monitoring. And during that process you have continuous communication. Now, the first two parts are usually what we call in our ECDC jargon the epidemic intelligence. This is something that we share immediately with the member states, and this is also where we train the fellows to be quite expert in that. What is less in the training is this risk management. So if we take the same cycle, we have training modules on surveillance. We have specific projects on surveillance. We train people in modules and in the field, in outbreak investigation, in field research. We give support to prevention and control measures to communicate the evidence to decision makers, to the scientific community, and to give targeted recommendations. But often we see a distance between our recommendations that we put on paper and reality in practice. So this is something where we need to get closer to reality. And in the fourth part of the quadrant, we feel more confident because this is where the field research takes place, where we do program evaluation, and here we feel much more at ease as epidemiologists or as public health microbiologists. So I believe that we need to take the opportunity here of being here in these 3 days with the EFSA community to see how we make the link to food risk assessment, because what I've learned from yesterday and from part of this morning, it is really a different world, but we need to see where the overlap is. And we also need to see how we can get our recommendations closer to practice. So in summary, the EPIAT Fellowships trains 40 specialists per year. The numbers are modest, but we cover most of the EU member states. We have training institutes in 22 member states, and usually these are national institutes. They create a network, so also their supervisors are a network of trust. We have joint operations between EPI and lab, and I think this is an asset in Europe. And we have a surge capacity during international crisis. The link to risk management needs strengthening, in my view, and the collaboration with food safety risk assessment. That is a question I'd like to answer before I go home to Stockholm. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. We have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions before the coffee break. Yes, 2 in the back of the room, and we'll pick up yours maybe in the final discussion.
Yes, Dr. Bosman, good morning. My name is Stef Bronsma. I'm from EFSA, European Food Safety Authority. Thanks for an excellent talk. I found it very striking, the example you brought about the cooperation between epidemiologists and microbiologists, which is an integral part of your program. I think a very auspicable added value of the program. Actually, you stimulated us already to think at EFSA also of doing a similar approach, a fellowship program, maybe similar to the EPIAT program. So we're very interested in this talk. Maybe on the last slide you already gave the answer actually to my question. What is the added value? And because I do realize there's a significant amount of resources, money involved in this. So how do you convince the funders of these programs what added value you bring?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Steph. This is a key question that is constantly on my mind to demonstrate added value. This is why I started with a 233 international outbreak response, because usually this outbreak response is triggered by political concern. And the need to have questions from experts quite fast. So we need experts that are trained to get this evidence under difficult circumstances, and that's exactly what our fellows are trained for. So it's an excellent way of demonstrating the added value. But that is kind of during crisis time. I think most of the added value needs to be visible during peacetime operations, which is to show how quality improves with your surveillance after the evaluation, that your quality of outbreak investigations speeds up and your understanding of population needs. Now, this is not something that is only presented in these annual conferences like ESCAIDE, but most of the output goes into the scientific writing, and we have now over 900 publications of the fellows on all of these topics. So I think that is something we continuously have to demonstrate also to the people funding these programs, that this is a return of their investment. On the other hand, it's not that difficult because most of the people funding the program, they are asking for more and more, because even if I would not have all those efforts, make all those efforts to make the output visible, they are telling me that they're seeing the value, whether I show it to them or not.
One last question.
Good morning, my name is Ines Martinez, I'm from Uruguay. And Uruguay is very concerned about our food production, and we know we are a very important region for the food production and protein to the world. We sell our meat to a lot of market, and I would like to ask about your programs, if there's only like presential ones, or you are thinking about developing online courses or programs in order to build capacity in South America, or in a way we are trying to improve building capacity in food safety, and we would like to know if you are thinking something about that.
Thank you very much. It's a really important question, because in the previous presentation we saw that this cannot be solved nationally, this cannot be solved regionally. We are a global village, and we need to have a global response and global comparable training. Now, there are 60 comparable training programs like EPIET. They are called Field Epidemiology Training Programs, FETPs, around the world, 62, and they are coordinated by the global network called TEFINET. There's a particularly strong one in Latin America. So several countries in Latin America have those programs. I think even Brazil has 2. So the trick is there to create a network, and also to link to those programs and give assignments to those fellows. So if you're working in the food industry, if you have pertinent questions that could be answered by either improving surveillance, or doing a field study, or even looking at food habits among people, or food hygiene habits, those are questions you can put as a project to those fellowships, and they will embrace those opportunities, because this is where they're there for.
Okay, thank you.